According to the Wall Street Journal, Fortune 500 companies are desperately seeking storytellers. So, what does that mean? What's in that skill set? And how do we make sure that one of humanity's oldest and most beautiful things doesn't get lost as some meaningless corporate buzzword? I propose four rules that corporate America desperately needs for storytelling, to give us an understanding of what storytelling is, to give us some ground rules that we can play by as we're actually making things more interesting. And these are: lead with one story, make me care before you make your case. If it's complicated, you haven't finished thinking, and put a face on it. Fortune 500 companies are suddenly hiring storytellers, and people across industries are agreeing that they need better storytelling. So, what does that mean? We need a shared definition. Otherwise, we're just making mouth noise at each other when we talk about this. So, leaning on my decade of experience as an educator, copywriter, and marketer, I've put together four simple rules of storytelling that companies can use to win hearts and minds. But before I reveal them, I'd like to talk about why they're so desperately needed. So let's start with a laugh. How many of you have ever gotten in an emotional argument with your significant other and then immediately just showed them a graph to prove that you were right? Hopefully none of you, because that's a ridiculous premise. Now, whenever I've used this line on stage at conferences, it's gotten a big laugh. And if anyone raises their hands, I say, "And how did that go?" And then they shake their heads because, of course, it went terribly, because that's a ridiculous premise. But somehow we think we can convince strangers online of things in the exact same way. We think that if we just hit them over the head with enough graphs, we're going to magically, just through osmosis, make them believe the things that we believe. There are real consequences when we fail to take the facts that we want people to believe and don't couch them in storytelling so that people are actually interested. During the lead up to the One Big Beautiful Bill earlier this year, clean energy folks were understandably all over the place, absolutely in a tizzy. We rallied in our clean energy groups, we called our legislators, and we tried to explain the benefits of clean energy to this new administration. Our pleas fell on deaf ears, and we absolutely got our butts handed to us in all of the lead up, all of the messaging, everything running up to it. The Inflation Reduction Act was essentially repealed, and the incentives for improving and deploying clean energy technologies that we as a country have had for so long were stripped away. Obviously, there were many reasons that this happened that were beyond our control. Of course, fossil fuel lobbying is a thing, and there's so many different politicians that think in different ways. But there is one giant thing that we dropped the ball on because, as an industry, we lost the battle in the public eye. We centered our messaging based on how we wish people consume information rather than how people actually consume information. We leaned way too hard on facts and not hard enough on stories. So before we go any further, I'd like to make sure we're working with shared definitions here. People with advanced degrees who work in white-collar jobs and therefore control the flow of information at large companies don't always know the difference between stories and facts in practice, so I'm including the Oxford Dictionary definitions. A fact is something that is known or proved to be true, the truth about events as opposed to an interpretation. A story is an account of imaginary or real people and events told for entertainment. It's an account of past events in someone's life or in the evolution of something. So for the rest of this article, whenever I say the word fact, I'm referring to a claim about reality that can be easily verified or falsified. Whenever I say the word story, I'm referring to a structured sequence of events that are designed to entertain, involving a character facing a problem, making choices, and experiencing change. A story does not make people feel like they're being beaten over the head with a textbook full of bar charts. Also, personal rant. Storytelling does not mean make the graphs look prettier. Here's where we went wrong. People in what's often called the educated middle or diploma divide severely overestimate the role of facts in convincing people of things, and severely underestimate the power of grounding those facts in a story. I work in the solar industry, and keeping up with policy is a large part of my job. So I read most of the articles, statements, and white papers from pro-solar trade groups as the government marched towards passing the One Big Beautiful Bill earlier this year. Most of the messaging that solar industry people put out to try to get legislators and the public on our side sounded something like, if we pass this legislation, we will lose 100,000 jobs in 3 years. Or if this bill passes, 800 gigawatts of planned renewable capacity won't be installed in the next decade. What this sounded like to the public was, if Congress passes this, 100 flamargons of gigawarbles won't be implemented in the next millennium. Most of them came with very silly-looking graphs that people had no context for understanding. Now, here's what we miss when we say things like, we're going to lose 100,000 jobs. We miss the human impact, because the truth is, it's not 100,000 jobs that are going to be lost. It's the fact that Jim's going to lose his job. Here's what I mean. If we pass this legislation, Jim's going to be laid off. Jim has a history of substance abuse, but he finally got clean. When he was at the end of his rope and didn't know where to turn, he found a workforce program that paid him to learn how to install solar panels. 3 years later, he's a crew foreman, making a great living. He's turned his life around and has dignity and self-respect for the first time in years. His wife and kids love him again. If we pass this legislation, we're going to tell Jim that the skills he's cultivated are useless, and we're going to pull that dignity away from him. And that pattern is going to happen 100,000 times. That's how you ground something in human impact. Do you see the difference? 100,000 of anything is a very difficult quantity for the human mind to wrap itself around. Without a story to back it up, numbers do a terrible job of conveying any sort of emotion. That fact can obviously be useful, but only if it's grounded in a story that explains the emotional impact that we can see ourselves in. This is why the Humane Society shows us one dog at a time when they ask us to adopt, and why nonprofits show one starving child when they ask us to donate. In order to care as human beings, we need to, 1, see ourselves in potential suffering, and 2, feel like it's a problem we can help with. People are far more likely to donate money when they are presented with information about specific individuals who are suffering, rather than statistics about a number of people suffering. There are millions of Jims in the world that anyone who's interested in making an emotional impact can interview to ground facts in emotion. The New York Times did this beautifully a few months ago when they interviewed a single mother who was severely impacted by out-of-control power costs in Georgia. Facts that are not grounded in emotion do a remarkably poor job of conveying information that people remember. They decay in the mind much faster than stories do. And do you know how I know that? I remember that there was a story in the New York Times about a woman who was a single mother working 3 jobs, trying to stay ahead, and the energy bill increases put her over the edge, and she was no longer able to make ends meet every month. And do you know what I don't remember? The amount of money that her bill went up by, because that was the fact. That's what I don't remember. But the story has stuck around in my mind. The fact doesn't need to be stored. My mind is not used to it because I am a human being, which means I come from a lineage of storytellers, and I'm wired to remember stories, but I'm not wired to remember numbers. So why do we have so much trouble grasping this concept? Even after getting our butts handed to us last summer, the clean energy industry continues to just pump out graphs like it's our freaking job, and they continue not to have a large impact. So why are we so determined to die on this hill? Honestly, I think we're blinded by education. In school, we were trained to work for our conclusions. In math class, we wrangled numbers and showed our work. In English class, we write long essays about themes in books and what they might mean. If we see ourselves as educated, we like there to be intellectual purity tests between us and the information that we accept so that we can continue to convince ourselves that we're intelligent. So when we're offering information to the general public, we assume that most people want to work for it like we do. And we're dead wrong for a few reasons. One, we're in the minority. Less than half of Americans have bachelor's degrees, and less than 15% have master's or other advanced degrees. And two, critical thinking is relatively new, whereas human beings have been telling stories for thousands of years. We are wired to remember them, not facts. When you package information as data rather than stories, you're going against human programming. You're asking people to just throw out what's actually most persuasive and follow completely new rules that we made up not that long ago. If we want to win hearts and minds to the clean energy cause, we've got to get comfortable using emotion. Facts simply do not speak for themselves. Below are some rules that have worked well in my own career. So, back to the rules I talked about at the beginning. Here's what they mean, and here's how you can apply them. Rule 1, lead with one story. Tell one story, then zoom out to the number. Statistics don't feel real until they have a face. The mind has trouble grasping 100,000 lost jobs, but it has no trouble understanding that Jim needs help. People reliably show more empathy and willingness to help or donate money when the victim is identifiable versus statistical. To apply this in the workplace, case studies and customer-facing outreach should lead with a story about a person, not an out-of-context metric. Even if you've helped 5,000 customers, you should lead with an interview of your best customers. If people see that one customer had a positive experience and then they see that you've helped 5,000 customers, they will assume that all 5,000 of those customers had an experience similar to the one that they just saw. If you just say, we've helped 5,000 customers, you'll be forgotten. Rule number 2, make me care before you make your case. Emotion and identity always come before logic. We overestimate the impact of logic because we believe ourselves to be rational. And that's part of our self-mythology. And we so desperately want to believe that we are rational beings. But in reality, most people only accept facts when those facts fit into or are adjacent to a story they already believe. Facts matter in winning people over, but they're not the entry point. Facts are what people reach for once they already want to believe what you're saying. Emotion is what gets them interested in the first place. It is far harder to challenge someone's identity and then ask them to believe something than it is to show them that something already fits in their established identity. That's what the phrase, until they know that you care, they won't care that you know, they won't care what you know, is about. So how to apply this in the workplace? Appeal to identity and emotion before logic. Find where the benefit of your product intersects with your customer's values, and then segment your messaging to meet each customer where they're at. At Exact Solar, we don't lecture conservative-leaning customers about environmental impact. We talk to them about sovereignty, energy independence, and family securities in emergencies. We tell them a story based on their values. Solar energy is a great product for reducing carbon footprint and for creating energy independence. Both things are true. But if we're coming at conservatives with the environmental benefits argument, we're fighting an uphill battle and we're making things harder than they need to be. So, make me care before you make your case. Rule number 3, if it's complicated, you haven't finished thinking. Big words don't get your point across. Simple messaging does. The role of data is not to just be presented. The role of data is to be packaged for the consumption of people who don't think about that data and don't care at all. There are way too many websites out there that just say things like, we offer integrated end-to-end synergistic solutions that advance materials and advance technology. The average person who reads that forgets it immediately. It doesn't tell any kind of story or explain why the person should use the thing. If you haven't taken the time to write out the benefits of your offering and then break it down in the simplest terms possible, then you are asking your customers to put in unnecessary work. So here's how you apply this in the workplace. Write out the following things. What does our product do? How did we make it do that? Who has it already helped by doing that thing? And why should anyone care? Now you have the building blocks of a product story. Write the answer out, then make brutal cuts until you have the shortest paragraph at the lowest reading level possible. That is how you break down your thinking and reduce complication and actually finish your thinking so that anyone will listen to you. And of course, rule number 4, put a face on it. People follow people. No one, myself included, ever picks up their phone and goes, I wonder what Bank of America is up to. They want to follow people, not brands. When you think of the Chicago Bulls, who do you think of? You very likely think of Michael Jordan. When you think of Microsoft, you think of Bill Gates. Audiences don't want to hear stories from a brand. They want to hear them from a credible human with skin in the game. As traditional media shrinks and brands lead harder into owned channels, people are getting information from people with influence. So to apply this in the workplace, identify your thought leader that you want to be the face of your company. Give them a repeatable format, a weekly memo, a short video, a customer story series, a founder's journal, a podcast, whatever. Anything that they can repeatedly put out into the world on a steady cadence that is manageable. Then you package your best stories in ways that they can easily share. If you follow the other 3 rules, this will be easy. Now, there you have it, folks. As promised, 4 simple rules to win hearts and minds through the power of stories. Remember, the world doesn't need more information. It needs more meaning. We already have plenty of graphs. The graph parts of our brains are completely full. There's no room left. What we need now are compelling, interesting, emotional narratives that drive people to make the right decisions. Thank you for tuning into The Modern Mythmaker. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend, share it on Substack. If you are watching on YouTube, please subscribe. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, also please subscribe or leave us a review. And if you are watching on Substack, please leave a like or a comment. Thanks very much.